This happened 2 years ago on our anniversary. My wife and I were celebrating 3 years of marriage, and we decided to both take the day off work and go for a drive down to the beach together. And what a drive it was, about 3 hours one way. The drive was amazing though. We had fantastic conversation and enjoyed various sights along the way. When we arrived there was only a few hours of daytime left, but we didn't much mind that. We kind of liked the idea of walking along the sand at night to gaze out among the stars and listen to the ocean peacefully, without the usual noise that comes with visiting the beach during the day. We ate dinner at a nice steakhouse right out on the water, and when we finished, we decided it was time to hit the beach finally. From the restaurant, we walked to our car, which was parked in the lot right next to the beach entrance. My wife grabbed her sweater and a blanket, while I grabbed a 6-pack and a small cooler we had brought. We headed towards the sand and went through a very old wooden fence with an opening cut out from it. We walked out toward the water and marveled at the sight of it. The moon was lighting our way beautifully. We stopped and chose a nice spot about 30 yards away from the waves crashing against the sand, about 70 yards I'd say from the wooden fence leading back to our car. We unfolded the blanket and sat down on top of it. After a few minutes of talking, kissing, and drinking, we laid down together. We were truly amazed by all the stars out in the sky. It was a gorgeous sight. I'd say about 15 minutes later, though, I felt a presence. I was still watching the stars, but I felt like now there was somebody else watching us. I sat up and noticed my wife had already drifted off and fell asleep. I looked around the beach, but I couldn't see anything immediately. It was complete serenity almost. When I turned completely around though, this is when my heart stopped in my chest. About 15 feet away from us, there was a man sitting behind us in the sand. This caught me completely off guard and scared the shit out of me, mainly because he didn't speak when he noticed that I had seen him. Instead, he sat down in the sand closer to us with a giant smile on his face. A giant, extremely creepy smile. I was surprised to see this, and at first I didn't know what to say. I glanced at my wife again, who was fully asleep in that moment. I'm not sure why, but I got the sense our lives were in real danger. I looked up and noticed the man's smile had disappeared and turned into a furious look. He then pulled out a huge knife from underneath him. I shook my wife awake, at the same time calling out the man. "What the fuck are you doing? Are you serious?" I was scared, but I did the best firm voice I could. My wife regained her focus and spun around to look at the man. At that moment, he smiled again. His giant grin made me shiver. My wife gasped when she saw he had a knife. He didn't say a word and didn't respond either. Instead, he clutched that knife so hard his knuckles looked white and took a step towards us. My wife gasped again. I forced myself to do something. I stood up as well. "What do you want? You can have our phones and our keys, but I have no cash, man." The man looked completely insane though, which was terrifying. He was wearing a brown suit, all ripped up looking. It looked like he'd pulled it out of a trash can or something. His long brown hair was a mess, and he looked almost homeless. Once again, he made no attempt to respond. After 15 seconds of unnerving silence, he finally did something. He began to run up to us very quickly. My wife screamed, and I almost had a heart attack. He stopped right before he stepped foot onto our blanket, and once again his smile turned into a crazy, angry-looking frown. I spoke one last time. "Dude, you can have everything, just be cool, man. You can have my beer." My voice was cracking. I was petrified. I tried to humanize myself to this guy and make him feel almost welcome to our stuff, like what he was doing wasn't a big deal. Then he finally spoke in a completely normal, insane voice. "I don't drink." Then he turned around and just walked away. Relief hit me like a ton of bricks. I kneeled down and grasped my wife's shoulder. The man continued walking away. At some point though, he stopped and turned around again. He didn't look at us though. Instead, he looked up at the sky for a moment. then turned around once more and made his way out through the fence. He disappeared into town. My wife started tearing up and I suggested we go now. We very quickly grabbed our belongings and started walking down the beach toward a different entrance leading to a parking lot next to the one our car was parked in. After circling around the huge parking lot, walking around the restaurant we ate at, we saw people laughing and talking outside. They had no idea the terror we just experienced. We approached our car, got inside, and drove away. We were pretty much silent on the way back home. My wife just hung her head out the window, and we haven't visited the beach ever since. A few months ago, I took in a new dog. Her original owners weren't able to bond with her, and they said she was unresponsive and disobedient, didn't have the look they wanted. I've got no idea what they were talking about. She's the best behaved dog I've ever known, and she's downright adorable as well. I'm used to people stopping me in the street so they can pet her. Usually, people will ask before they touch her, or at the very least, they'll say something. You know, "Oh my god, look at that dog." They let me know they're obviously gonna come over and say hello to her. I'm pretty much fine with that. What I'm not fine with is what happened on one of my earlier walks with her. I live in a tiny seaside town, and I kind of take my dog on a tour of all the areas closest to the sea. When I walk her, I'll walk along the beach, down the promenade, around the miniature lakes, and then home. Probably not smart to stick to the same route every single day, but I've switched things up since this happened. Anyway, we were at the final stage of our walk one evening, making a couple of laps around the lakes, when we walked past a man. Now, a lot of older men like to gather there on a regular basis. I didn't think much of one guy just sitting on a bench by the water. I told myself he was only staring because my dog was so cute. I passed him by, and then from behind me, I heard him say, "Sit." My dog did. She was much more obedient than her previous owners had let on. My dog sat down right away and looked up at me all happy, expecting a treat. I frowned and looked back at the guy. He was still on the bench just watching us. I quickly encouraged my puppy to start walking again. We hadn't even got 5 feet further down the path when the man commanded to my dog again. My dog did exactly what he said. I turned around, already glaring, and saw the man was now up on his feet. I told my dog to keep walking and pick up the pace as well, trying to get over to the path that led up to the main street. We were still nowhere near the path though, when the man yelled another command. My dog was about to do it, but she was starting to look at me confused. I was pretty terrified though. The man was now rushing over to us, and he was catching up fairly quickly. He was close enough that even without my glasses, I could tell he had this huge grin on his face. At that point, I'd had enough. I forgot about getting to the path and scooped up my dog off the ground in my arms. I ran straight up the hill to the side of us and climbed over the small fence that separated the lakes from the street. The man didn't try to follow over the fence, but instead stayed at the bottom of the hill, looking up at us. He was no longer smiling anymore though. I'd never seen him before in my life, and I haven't seen him visit the lake again since then either. I really hope it stays that way. I don't know exactly what his intentions were that night, but it seemed to me he was using my dog's obedience to slow me down and keep me from getting away from him. I doubt they were good intentions, and I'm glad I didn't have to stick around to find out. Hello, I have a story to share with you all. This happened to me about 15 years ago. I lived near the ocean, and I frequented a certain spot on the beach all the time. It was a very lonely spot, and not many people ever showed up there. This one Saturday afternoon, as I recall, I was lying out in the sand in my spot, relaxing and getting a tan on. It's not uncommon for me to fall asleep while doing this. as I sometimes did if the sun was not too hot on my skin. This particular day, I had fallen asleep. I woke up a while later to the sun now setting. I realized I must have been sleeping for quite a while. When I looked over to my left, I was startled to see a woman sitting right next to me in the sand. Not on a towel or anything. She was wearing jeans shorts and a bathing suit top. She had very striking red hair as well. At first, I didn't even really acknowledge her. There were a couple of other people around further along the beach, but after glancing at her a few times, I noticed she was just kind of staring out into the ocean. She didn't even turn to look at me, or anybody else really. I felt a bit of curiosity and said hello to her. She said hello back without hesitating or even turning her head to look at me. Right after that, she sprung to her feet and walked away. I thought that was all quite weird, but I didn't really think anything else of it. I'd say about 30 minutes later, I was packing up my stuff, and I left soon after. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I'd had a pretty great day relaxing there all in all. Once I was home, I started making myself some dinner when I heard my phone start ringing. I walked over to my purse on the counter and pulled it out. It was my mom. We started talking about the usual things when all of a sudden, I noticed what looked like a square piece of folded paper sticking out from inside my purse. In the midst of our conversation, my mom continued talking whilst I pulled this mystery paper out and unfolded it. I was confused because I was absolutely sure I hadn't put anything like that in there. I dropped my phone when I read what was written inside. The note said this: "I was going to rob you and stab you in the throat, but you just looked too peaceful laying there." I picked up the phone and told my mom what happened, remembering that girl on the beach. We both nearly passed out together. I'd like to tell you my story now. I was working as a driver for Uber about a year ago. As you might guess, doing that job resulted in meeting many strange people, many drunk people, quiet people, all sorts of people, and in a few rare cases, some creepy people as well. This story does not involve a creepy person though. It involves my one and only encounter with a terrifying person. One evening, around 11 p.m. or so, I was getting pretty tired. I had already been working for several hours, but I decided to pick up just one more person, then call it a night and go home. This last person's pickup location was in a very bad neighborhood. I had dropped off another group of people here about a week before this night. I pulled up to the house set up as the pickup location and immediately noticed it looked quite run down and vacant as well. It didn't look like anybody should or even could be living in it. All the same though, a man walked out of the house before I could even inform him on my phone that I had arrived. He looked completely normal, which was a huge relief. He jumped in the back and said hello, and thanked me for picking him up from such a strange location. I asked him where he needed to go. He didn't give me the address like I'm used to though. He just told me to head down the street and make a right. I didn't think anything of this. After following his instructions, he told me to then get on the freeway, go about 15 miles, then get off on Lincoln Boulevard. I was happy to hear this, as it wasn't all that far away from where I lived at the time. This being my last ride of the night, I didn't want to have to drive a huge distance just to get back home after. After getting off on Lincoln, he told me to drive another 4 miles up, then make a right turn. After he gave those directions, I started getting a bit uneasy. After driving those 4 miles and making that right turn, he told me to make a left about a mile up the street. Upon hearing those instructions, I felt even more nervous. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but those were the exact instructions to get to my neighborhood. I followed his instructions and made the left as I was asked to. I asked what was next after this. He didn't say anything for a few moments. I looked in the rearview mirror, only to feel my heart sink. He was just staring at me, with his eyes bug-eyed wide. I repeated myself, and he finally replied, "Go another mile, then make a left on Patterson." I can't tell you the level of fear I reached after hearing that. That was the exact same street I lived on. Did this guy know where I lived? Was he directing me back to my house? My heart started to race. I made the left turn, then asked what was next. He responded instantly, "Up that street there. My house is on the right." I felt sick. I kept driving and started to slow down a bit. I tried not to look at it as I passed by my own home slowly. "Which one is it?" He was silent for a moment, then whispered in a quiet and sinister voice, "You just passed it." I stopped the car. My heart was now throbbing. I looked in the rearview mirror to see him now smiling. I asked him again which one it was. I was still looking at him. He replied to me without breaking his gaze or his smile. 1905. I jumped out of my car after hearing him say that. That was my address. I started running into the middle of the street. I took out my phone from my pocket and dialed 911. He jumped out of the car on the opposite side of me. I ran into my neighbor's bushes and made the choice to knock on their front door. I pounded furiously for a moment. I turned around to see where the man was. I was expecting to see him right behind me. But now he was nowhere in sight. I told my neighbors what had just happened. A police officer showed up shortly after that, but the man was already gone. Your guess is as good as mine as to how he knew where I lived, what my address was. I still have no idea how he knew that. I didn't see him again either. I never picked up another person after that. I have a very scary story to tell you. I was out of work and desperate for cash when I looked on Craigslist under gigs. A few years back, I'd responded to several ads, ranging from painting to helping people move or cleaning on a Sunday morning. Somebody called me and told me they had some work for me. They said the job was to clean a kitchen inside a small building that was recently closed down. He was apparently renovating it and needed me to show up and work in the evening, starting at around 7 p.m. and ending at around 1 or 2 in the morning. It was only going to be for tonight, but he promised to pay me in cash, $200 in fact. That sounded just fine to me. I had no problem with those hours either, as my last job was a graveyard shift anyway. So the man I was talking to gave me the address, and I told him I'd be there right on the dot at 7 o'clock. He sounded like a nice, normal guy. In fact, I showed up a little bit before 7 and approached the building. This building was one amongst many others downtown, but for some reason, this one looked eerily lonely. It had no windows and no lights were working outside in front of it either. I thought it might be some sort of bar that was closed down or something. I knocked on the big wooden door when I heard a noise coming from inside. Eventually, a man opened up. He was very tall and had this thick goatee. He looked to be in his 50s or so. He greeted me with a big smile and asked me to come on in. There was a single lamp lighting the room we were in, and indeed it looked like some sort of old bar. The room wrapped around another smaller room in the center of it. It looked as if he was painting the walls and working to fix the top of the bar, which was rotting old wood. He showed me to the central room, which seemed to be the kitchen. It was very dirty. All glasses and dishes were laying around everywhere. The oven was pulled out from the wall, showing the rotting drywall behind it. Sawdust and dirt was all over everything. He told me I was to clean this area and get as much done as possible before 2 a.m. I told him I'd work my ass off, and he pointed out some cleaning products sitting on the ground by the wall, with some rags to scrub as well. I asked if he had any gloves or anything. He said no, but that the sink in the corner still worked, and I could clean my hands whenever I wanted with it. That sucked. I was a bit hesitant to clean the stuff in there without gloves, but I remembered that big $200 he promised and moved past my disappointment. He told me while I was cleaning that he was going to be working outside at the bar. I asked where I should begin, and he said scrubbing the baseboards around the room. I told him okay, and he walked out. Fast forwarding a bit, I had been cleaning for about 2 hours now, and was actually making a fair bit of progress. I was getting very thirsty. I told myself I would finish this one spot before exiting the room to ask if there was anything I could drink. I kicked myself for not thinking to bring a water bottle along with me. After finishing my goal, I stood up, only to realize I'd not heard him working outside the room at all. I hadn't heard anything, as a matter of fact. I walked to the door and opened it, only to find darkness, completely pitch black. At that instant, I became very nervous. "Hey, man, I'm making some good progress in here, if you want to see." I expected to hear him respond. He didn't, though. I looked around nervously, but I couldn't see anything. The only light source was gone. I looked back into the kitchen, which was bright and all lit up with the lights all on and working in the ceiling. I peered back out into the dark room. I began taking steps out into the room surrounding the kitchen. After taking about 10 whole steps, I stopped and was about to speak up again. To my horror, the door had slammed shut behind me. I was now engulfed in blinding darkness. I couldn't see anything. I spun around, waving my arms and walking back toward the kitchen door. My steps were small, as I had no idea what was in front of me. I was afraid I would run into something. In fact, I did, waving my hands around in front of me. I felt them hit something, only it was not a door. I'd smacked right into somebody's face. I scuttled backward, not hearing anything. Whoever I had just touched didn't react at all. I backed up until I hit the back wall and realized I must have been close to the entrance door of the building. I turned around and felt blindly for a doorknob. Luck was on my side. I quickly found it and pulled the door open. It was very dark outside at this point, and only a very small amount of moonlight came into the room, just enough for me to see the man standing against the kitchen door with a blank expression on his face. I ran out the door and never looked back. That's the last time I used Craigslist to find work. What was that guy doing? What was he going to do? It makes me sick just thinking about it.